For those of you who haven't been at a Clark event before, and we seem to have extracted a large part of our audience here, but they're with you, and you're certainly with them. We do lots of things, from conferences to colloquia to lectures and one-day symposia, which you're going to witness today. We also do a large Mellon-supported international initiatives where we've gone with, on many occasions, to Africa, to Southeast Asia, and to Central and Eastern Europe. But what I'd like to do today is, first of all, thank Tom Crow and Jonathan Katz, who have brought a remarkable group of scholars together to consider the ways in which we all understand the history of modern and contemporary art. Indeed, we swim in the, can you swim in the shadow? Let's say we live in the shadow of some of the authors represented here, who are responsible for the dominant paradigms of historical interpretation in modern and contemporary art history. And this meeting, however, this symposium does not just celebrate their achievements. We well could do that on and on and on. But what we're doing today is asking all of the panelists to reevaluate and reassess their positions. How might this particular history of modern and contemporary art be told as we go into the future? What alternatives do our speakers find valuable? We hope this meeting will be an occasion for lively and animated controversy. I always like to encourage that, as deeply held values are exchanged and debated, and we hope you enjoy it very much. Before I leave the podium, what I'd like to do, since this is unusual to put all our speakers, this symposium is unusual in many ways, but we rarely have all of our speakers up on the stage here at the beginning. So I would like to just have you raise your hand when I say who you're looking at. Thomas Crow, former fellow, I'm always going to put that first, is the former fellow here at the Clark, is the Rosalie Salo Professor of Modern Art and Associate Provost for the Arts at New York University. Jonathan Katz is also former fellow, is the director of the doctoral program in visual studies at the University of Buffalo, and president of the newly opened Leslie Lohman Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art in New York, the world's first queer art museum. The participants in alphabetical order are a former graduate student, David Breslin, who I'm happy to say is assistant director of the research and academic program at the Clark. James Elkins, who's the Clark professor this year, is the E.C. Chadbourne Chair in the Department of Art History, Theory, and Criticism at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Bryony Fair is professor of the history of art at University College London. Hal Foster is a Clark Prize winner, a very recent winner of something we're very proud of, the Clark Prize for Art Writing. Hal Foster is the Townsend Martin 1917 Professor of Art and Archaeology at Princeton. Former fellow Matthew Jesse Jackson is an associate professor of the Departments of Visual Arts and Art History at the University of Chicago. Former fellow Mignon Nixon is professor of art history at the Courtauld Institute of Art in London. Alison Perlman is a writer and teaches modern and contemporary art and design history at the California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. Katie Siegel is a professor of art history at Hunter College and editor-in-chief of Art Journal. Former graduate student Robert Slifkin is an assistant professor of fine arts at the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University. Theodore Triandos is a PhD candidate in the Department of Art History at the University of Delaware. And finally, Paul Wood is senior lecturer in the Department of Art History at the Open University in London. Thank you all for accepting our invitation. We really look forward to this day. Shall I turn it over to you, Jonathan and Tom?
What would you? Tom first. And
okay. Thank you.
Well, I'll simply second all of Michael's thank yous and add one, of course, for her. Without her, this would not be taking place. And it goes back to it's a great legacy of events and gatherings that the Clark has fostered over the years, which I've been, really delighted to be part of so often. Now, this is, even for the Clark, I think is going to be a different kind of conference. One that was intended to alleviate the standard conference malady of too much talking at and too little talking with. Michael and Jonathan Katz first hatched the idea of a gathering to take this kind of collective sounding of where we are in the study of recent art. And when Jonathan and I began planning it, and I'd certainly agreed that it was a timely idea, and I was glad to jump in. The idea of a group conversation around a body of writing emerged. I mean, we might have come up with some other sort of alienation effect, but that was the one that we chose. And so far, in our sort of getting acquainted session last night, the rubric seemed to generate quite a lot of compelling interchanges. We'd also generate in the process a kind of survey sourced from the participants about what kinds of texts, both affirmatively and critically, were salient in their thinking on their own practice and the larger state of this subfield. And we wanted those participants to be as fresh a mixture of critic historians as we could put together, mixing well-known veterans with some voices who really haven't had a chance to be heard that often in this sort of forum, varied ages, places of origin, kinds of institutional affiliation, so that we would not risk, redundancy in relation to, other anthologies and other kinds of well-known conversations. Jonathan's going to tell you a bit about, what transpired in the discussions last night, wanting to have a little bit of an experience with one another before we sort of took it live today, as it were. And we've set our time span for today's discussion over a period when the study of contemporary art went from being a kind of tiny anomaly within the professional world of art history to the threshold of its current preponderance in the choices of where to study that new entrants into the field of art history are making. When it was all so very small and against the grain of an entrenched discipline, back around 1975, solidarity among the adherents of contemporary art study seemed to be paramount and necessary. With the growing intellectual prominence and institutional success of recent art and contemporary art studies, inevitably cracks and fissures start to appear, and a range of discontents that never really get a proper kind of public airing, many just vaguely articulated. So our aim today is to take this out into the light, to project positively into future possibilities based on a shared effort at assessment of where we've been in as unvarnished a way as we can manage over the course of the day. Right now, then, I will turn things over to Jonathan Katz, my colleague in this, to say a little bit about last night's session and then get the proceedings of the day kicked off. Thank you.
We invited our participants to select essays. Some gave us more than one. We chose among those, but one of the inevitable structural issues associated with doing anything like this is that, of course, you get what you get. And last night we were a little worried at first because the selection of text did look rather like the meeting on an operating room table of a sewing machine and an umbrella. And we were powerfully concerned how it would end up. But actually, what it turned out to be, rather fortuitously, is a broader conversation on, broadly, the epistemological and ontological framing of the modern Western picture. And two very different texts, the Boom and the Wall, found points of contact on that ground. The Wall text, however, had a very different and much more particularly social historical import, and the Boom text very much instead, and I trust that the panel will correct me if I err in my assessment of what happened last night, much more invested instead in the idea of indeterminacy of vision and its critical payoffs. I think to do perhaps more than that will take us astray, so perhaps we'll get into the conversation, and surely, as we hope throughout all the panels, what will happen today in one panel, we hope, bleeds over into the other panels, and though we are looking at a discrete set of texts in each of these, our intention, at least, is to have an overarching conversation about some of the critical issues in criticism today. I want to just note to some of the younger people in the audience to give you a sense of what it feels like for me to stand here and talk about these issues, that when I first announced my dissertation topic in the mid-'80s, I was told that I could not work on a living artist. And so that was the overarching critical context in which, at least for many of us moving on in years, this conversation needs to be understood. Thank you.